Hey, Christina here. Welcome to my crystal art series. I'll be showing you the design process behind Tranquility Stream of Balance. Let's go. I wanted to share with you guys my mood board and what I was inspired by when creating this piece. So, this piece actually had a different turn point, I guess you could say. I actually started with a different stone when starting to paint this piece, and then as I was painting it, I actually thought of a different connection point with this piece. So I quickly found some inspiration right away when I started working on it. And this pretty much changed into turquoise. I saw a connection, I saw a story within the piece, and I just had to continue with that new idea. So the inspiration behind this piece was really influenced by the Indian culture, its fashion, as well as jewelry, and tying it back to the ancient times of the Egyptians. One of my favorite things. I really love ancient Egypt, its stories, its art forms, amazing, amazing people. So I really wanted to harness that because turquoise is an ancient stone and it was used by the ancients. So I really wanted to emphasize that type of history that this stone carries. So through my inspiration, I also looked at the turquoise stone in general to see what kind of characteristic that it carries. So of course, it carries the bright turquoise color, very vibrant and very, I would say, calm, tranquility driven, because that's what it was for. And within that stone, it has some gold little designs within it. It almost looks like a marble effect within the stone. So I really wanted to look at different types of marble textures to mimic what that stone has within. And the stone itself does have those gold tinges to it. So I looked at a lot of gold and what kind of gold I wanted to use, because there's different types of shades of gold and types of finishes that I could do on this piece. So that was something to look into. And the first thing when I thought of turquoise was I thought about the beaches, the tropical beaches, the beautiful water, how the water and the sky kind of bleed together. It's so cool. And I really wanted to harness that in some way within this piece. And then just tying it back to jewelry, I was also looking at glitter texture because I really wanted the stone turquoise to have that luxurious feel, because it was a very wealthy type of stone back in the ancient times from what I see. So I wanted to really bring in that type of premium look. So that was the type of influences that I had when looking at the stone and thinking about what kind of imageries that I want to harness when taking on this piece. So moving right into Procreate, so I started with my normal routine with planning out the layout, and I wanted to keep the layout balanced because that's what turquoise is all about. It's about balance, alignment, keeping everything in harmony. So I really wanted to play on that main characteristic that turquoise offers and radiates. So kept the layout rather balanced, rather symmetrical to a certain extent. And I used the monoline brush tool to bring in that base line work. Once the line work was all in, I added in the base colors, and I started with a light color at the top and then a darker color at the bottom, so that there's weight to the piece, that there's no weight at the top, because we want to feel light as we go in and then heavier at the bottom. So it draws your eye right down the piece. And I wanted to bring in an accent color. So I know that the blue and orange are complementary colors. So I kind of thought about that type of treatment, but I tweaked the colors around a bit, but they still have a slight contrast between each other. So I wanted to use gold to bring in that accent, but also to harness what type of colors turquoise has within the stone. Now, at first, when I was designing this piece, you'll see that the colors are a little bit dull at first because I was actually starting with a different stone. And then surprisingly, I want to change things last minute, which normally I don't do, but I saw something within this piece and it had to be finished with the new idea that I had in mind. So I continued with what I had. The layout was perfect, everything else was perfect. It was just the colors that needed tweaking, but I laid everything out the way that I wanted, and then in the end, I finessed it. So I will share with you what I have done so far. So after laying down all the base colors, I started with a texture brush called Flicks, and I used this in the first section of the piece, and I also mixed it in with a brush called Clouds. And I basically brought in a darker blue within that section to create some depth, because I didn't want things to look a little flat. I wanted to bring in some dimension to the piece. And then in the second section, I mixed a driven snow brush and a flicks brush to, again, add dimension and variety. But I wanted to play on that glittery reference that I had in my mood board. So I wanted to bring in some sort of sequency look to bring in that luxury feel. And then the third section, I used the accent color Burnt Tree to add in a marble effect. So I was tying it back to the marble texture that I had before. And what I did was I used the gold accent color to really bring it over that blue, and it really brings that cool contrast between the two, because if I just did dark blue, I don't think it would have much of an impact. And I did that same type of treatment in that second section as well, where I brought in the opposite, where I brought in the gold as a flat base, and then I brought in the blue over top, and that brought in some variety, some interest, and mixing in these colors can really benefit that way, because sometimes just playing with one color in a tint and a shade, sometimes it doesn't have the strongest effect. So bringing in its contrast color can really draw in some interest. And the next part was finishing off the piece. So I used a studio brush and I explored thick and thin line work because I wanted to add interesting shapes and really emphasize those interesting shapes. So the top, you see, it almost looks like clouds, and I kind of mimicked that beachy kind of feel that I saw within my mood board inspiration that I found, because every time I think of turquoise, I think of the beaches, and I really wanted to take on that feel, because when we're at the beach, we feel calm, we feel relaxed, and that's what I wanted to bring to this piece. So if you're curious, in the end of this piece, I changed the colors around to bring more saturation and liveliness to it, because turquoise is so bright, it's so energetic looking, and the stone that I had before, it didn't have that impact that I thought it would have. So I ended up changing this to turquoise, and I really love the decision that I made. And I thought the story was strong to support this piece. So sometimes making that sacrifice is always a good thing too. So really bringing in that saturation and different shades of that turquoise really broke up the piece in such a way that it brings such elegance to this piece, and I thought that that was so meaningful. So next, I wanted to bring my piece into Illustrator where I set up the card. So I laid out my card in an 8.5 by 11 landscape file, and I made 2 rectangular shapes at about 4 by 6 inches, and I put them side by side, and I put a line in between both boxes to showcase the center point. That's where the fold line was going to be. And then with my Pathfinder tool, I merged the 2 shapes together into one whole shape, because now the line in the middle tells us what is the front and what is the back of the card. And then I made my little crop marks in each corner of the card, and this was going to determine where I'll be cutting when this piece is printed. I placed my image within the file, and I placed it on the right side because that's the front of the card, and on the back of the card I put any type of branding or any description I want to have in the back of the card. I have it all laid out there. I saved it as a PDF, and then we're on to bringing it to my drafting table. So taking this to my drafting table, I laid it out on my scoring kit, and I brought out my scoring utensil, and I measured where my center point was going to be using the lines that I set up for myself. And I used my scoring utensil to make a small dent at the top of the page when facing up the card, so my art is facing me, and I just make a mark of where it's going to be, flip it around, and then I score all the way down the page so that the fold line is equal and it's pretty much even when it's being folded. Nothing is ripping at the edge because it's out of line. I make sure that when I'm scoring, I score it not too hard, but just enough that there's an even balance on the fold line. So once that is all scored, I move to my cutting board and X-Acto knife and ruler, and I line up my crop marks and I cut it down to size. And then once that's all cut, I bring out my bone tool, and that tool helps to fold my card in a clean way that it looks seamless. So now, just to wrap up the piece and to bring interest, I was continuing to be inspired by the ancient Egyptians and the Indian culture, so I brought in metallic gold paint to highlight interesting contours within the piece. I really wanted to bring that luxurious feel, and I wanted to add glitter gold paint to the accent area, so the second section. And I wanted to do that because I wanted to bring some life to the piece, give it that premium feel, and I also wanted to make it look ancient and valuable, as if it was a treasure to the ancients back at the time. So that's pretty much it for behind the scenes to this piece and my story. So I want to thank you guys for sticking around and listening to my process, and I hope that you guys stick around for more of my videos. Have a good day, guys. Bye.